Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Firebreathin. Please like and subscribe our videos on YouTube. And if you're listening on the air, thanks so much for that. Keep sharing that and keep telling your friends about us on YouTube and on the radio. Thanks for that. So we're going to go into this, and we do have a great progressive on that's running against Jerry Nadler over in New York 10, Lindsey Boylan. Lindsey, thanks so much for coming on the program. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Lindsey, let's go into this. Can you just tell the viewers that aren't affiliated with you a little bit about yourself and, what you've done throughout your career?
Sure. So I'm running the Democrat to be the first one in 50 years to lead the 10th Congressional District, which for those of you who don't know, it's basically the west side of Manhattan, more Manhattan, and parts of Brooklyn. And I came to New York right after college with $100 in my pocket. I moved 9 times in 10 years, and my life really changed tremendously over that time. I started off in urban planning, and I love public spaces. How could we make urban spaces work better for people? That was kind of my inspiration to coming in New York. And I ended up managing Bryant Park and several other public spaces in the city. During that time, I went to business school at Columbia while working full time. And then I went into municipal finance, so funding, infrastructure, and government. And then I worked for the state, ultimately directly for the governor, overseeing all the economic development and housing portfolio, like you just mentioned. And there's no better time or more important time to have someone who has been focused on issues of job creation, issues of the future of New York, issues of making New York work for more people than right now, because we are facing a real challenge, not simply with this public health crisis, but how we help people afterwards, how we help New York move forward. So, though none of us could have predicted this moment, I think it validates even more so our run. This happens to be the most unequal district in the country. We've got a lot of tremendous assets, but we also have a lot of challenges. And this should be front and center where we figure out the way forward for New York and for the country.
So what issue, I guess, was the tipping point for you that said, hey, I got to get out there and do something?
For me, it was, so I was working in state government, so I had kind of already been there. But I think to your point, this idea that the people who are in office and who are leading us aren't simply enough to change our world. And I think that's what you talk about when you talk about Bernie and the progressive movement. And for me, a big part of the aha moment was when I was working in the state. And I had been overseeing the state's recovery work in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. I had also been overseeing the state's housing portfolio and how to better help New York City public housing, or NYCHA. And what I found in both of those issues was states leading, cities struggling to try and lead, and a federal government that was completely looking the other way. And I'm not just talking about the Trump White House, I'm talking about Congress. And that is a federal government that's missing in action has been a problem for a long time. And all of the issues that we have, we cannot address at the state and local level. If we want a healthcare system that treats all of us equally, if we want Medicare for all, if we want to treat housing as a human right, which we must, if we want to deal with our climate disaster, all of these things have to be led at the federal level. And I just kept running up against work that I was trying to do that was limited by the fact that we had really ineffective people in federal government, namely the guy I'm running against now. And it just wasn't good enough. And it pissed me off. I think that's what happened to a lot of people. And then I saw all these people in the midterms get out, all these women predominantly, and say, hey, I'm going to make that change. I'm going to ruffle feathers and I'm going to do something about it. And that's what we're doing. And we're in it to win it.
Right. Lindsey, let's talk about a lot of the issues, and you brought up quite a few of them up in your last answer. Medicare for all, housing for all, and we'll get into this a little bit later on, but just kind of a side note, we see the stimulus with the $1,200. I mean, the majority, about 90% of the people that live in your district, they can't use that to pay rent. That's not enough.
No.
You see that all over the country, that house rent is over $1,200 for most states in the country. So with that being said, when you were on the ground, shaking hands, doing town halls, and obviously you're doing more stuff on the internet right now, what issues were you hearing mostly from your constituents, rather?
So it's great you brought up rent, because that's been one issue in my community. So, I think Medicare for all and making sure healthcare is affordable is a reflection of inequality, extreme inequality, because increasingly people are spending huge percentages of their income, their take-home pay, trying to get treated for basic things. And the same is true of housing, and especially in a city like New York, especially in a district like mine. 1 in 3 people basically in my community before this crisis was severely rent burdened. That means if they had one bad month, they could be out of their apartments. If they had one bad month where they weren't getting paid, unexpected costs, they could be, screwed. They could have to, they could lose their homes. And that was before this crisis. So the fact that you bring up the $1,200 and the limitations of who that went to, it didn't help anyone in my community. And the whole point of the cash injections, and I had argued for monthly and still argue for monthly $2,000 payments, not means tested, was that a lot of other things are going to take a while to work themselves out, including unemployment benefits. I know a ton of people in my community who still aren't getting them, and they qualify for them just because of the bottleneck of the number of people applying or the complexity of actually getting benefits. And the whole point of those cash injections was to help people in the interim, just to your point with rent. It wasn't enough, and it really hits home for the issues that hurt my community the most of housing.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%. We're also worried, about people that can't pay rent and what's going to happen. Are they going to get thrown out of their houses at a certain amount of time? So that's extremely scary. We're seeing that even in Florida,
Yes.
where I'm at also.
Yeah, and it's, one of the things I think just really quickly on that is what we're seeing now is our social safety net isn't set up to help people. Yeah. It's set up to prevent people from getting benefits, especially in Florida where you are, and especially in places like North Carolina, but also in New York. The system to even get access to SNAP benefits or housing vouchers or unemployment goes through so many iterations, and that's intended to make people give up. What kind of a country, what kind of a system does that to people?
I want to talk about this with the coronavirus going on, Lindsey. How has that changed your campaign? Obviously, you can't go out and, shake people's hands, talk, knock on doors. And for a person that's a first-time candidate, that must be extremely hard. And how have you been getting through all those issues as a first-time candidate to get donations too?
Yeah. It is very hard. But the hardest thing is, of course, having a sense of how many people are struggling and not being in a position to really do what I want to do about it at this point. And that's the most frustrating. I have to say, I would never choose this moment in any way. I would never choose this for anyone in any community. But this really does make the case for how much we need our government to work for us and how much it's not working for us. And so just anecdotally, 6 months ago, when I try to talk to people in my community, the kind of responses I would get in some cases were, you seem great, I'll vote for you, I'll think about it, but I got to go. I got stuff that I got to do, And right now, people all know what they need from their government that they're not getting. And so for me, it makes the case of why we're running, why our team is working so hard every day, why people are donating to us. I mean, last week we had in one day the most donations we've ever had, small dollar donations. And that's in the midst of this crisis. So for me, the conversations, I'm probably reaching more people and having their attention and their focus than I would 6 months ago. So, and I think the case is all the more important for change. So of course, I would never choose this moment, and it's not easy to be doing everything this way always. I love meeting people in person. I love listening. I'm a hugger when, and other constraints, and obviously all that's out the window. At the same time, I'm a mom of a 6-year-old, and right before this happened, we were watching our favorite new show together, and I fixed her some chicken soup for lunch. So, there are these small blessings in a difficult moment for everyone. And I don't want to say in any way that this is an okay experience for anyone. I just say, I probably wouldn't be seeing, as a first-time congressional candidate, my daughter nearly as much on a daily basis. Everything I do is for her. She might even pop in here while we're on the interview. So just trying to put I sit in a tremendous place of privilege right now because my family's okay. My daughter's with me at home. We're not worried about rent. We're okay on rent. We're fine. And so I can't really complain about whatever this process is.
What they tried to do, and I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, what they're still trying to do, trying to put a lawsuit again after they tried to cancel the June primary, which would have hurt people like you running, people like Lauren running, and other progressives running. And now you guys got it back on because Andrew Yang supposedly went in there and shook things up. Well, I'm sure you know more than me about that. But now I'm told that there's another lawsuit to try to get that off the books again. Can you speak about this?
Yeah. Well, I just think, the original argument was for safety concerns, we have to end the presidential primary and just do congressional. Come on in. Hey, come here for 2 seconds. I want to introduce you to someone. Actually, he'll really appreciate the t-shirt you're wearing.
Okay.
You see her t-shirt?
I love your t-shirt. That's a Bernie t-shirt. I definitely saw that.
It's a Bernie t-shirt. It's a Bernie t-shirt.
Definitely saw
I will
that
get it after my podcast. Yeah, it's a Bernie t-shirt. So sorry to interrupt myself, but
that's great.
interrupt our conversation, but I thought you'd appreciate that. There's a bug in the apartment somewhere. Again, this is momming at home, campaigning at home. But so, the whole argument they made about canceling the presidential primary was, how are we going to keep people safe? But they had already moved to absentee ballots for the rest of the rest of the races outside of the presidential primary. And the arguments weren't logical. What they were saying was things like, we don't need the Board of Elections spending time doing any of this work for the presidential primary. Well, they're doing even a lot more work now fighting against this most recent court win. And having been through the process of having to get petitions, having to do all of these things, the Board of Elections is consistently working. And on an individual basis, I really admire the work of the people. So I don't want to say, it's like most things. Individual people are doing good work. It's the system that corrupts, in my view. And I think that's the case here, because we may have a democratic state, but we have a governor who runs the state party in essence, and for whatever reason was convinced to think that having the presidential primary on the same day would, in my view, help progressives, like you said, and so they've gone to extraordinary lengths to cancel it. Now, to your point, Andrew Yang challenged that in court, and Bernie Sanders delegates, I believe, also joined that case. And even though the state is appealing it, the state party, I don't think they're going to win. And now, even just where we are in the process with the primary being on June 23rd, I've already received my absentee ballot application. How are they going to? They can't change all of that now. I mean, the most confusing, anti-democratic, unsafe thing they could do is cause mass confusion, and that's what they're doing. And to such an extent, in terms of the delays and the sense that some people have about the absentee ballot application, that they're probably going to have way more people showing up in person because of the way that they've managed this communications process, because of the confusion that they've created. My husband's going to vote in person. I'm still debating if I want to vote by absentee or in person, because I want the picture and whatnot. But you don't want to have many people showing up in person and making that an issue. But all of these confusion and the idea that people don't even know that there's a primary in some cases, and then we have to explain to them what's happening, just lends itself to more problems. And it's anti-democratic. And it is the manifestation of machine politics that is, I think, is preventing us from helping people on a daily basis at the federal level. Same kinds of tactics.
Why are you running when you have no experience? Why run for a U.S. House seat? Some people, it's why run for the U.S. Senate. Instead of starting small, start as a council member, a mayor, or this or that. So when you get that question, which I'm sure you've gotten, what is your answer to that?
Sure. Well, and I think there are a lot of really good answers depending on who you are. But what I say is, I was the top jobs person for the whole state of New York, one of the biggest economies in this world, a bigger economy than some countries. And I came to New York with nothing, and I made a life for myself, and I'm a mom in this community. And I come from a generation that has never been able to do as well as the previous generations because of the financial crisis, because of all of these factors that have been built up against us instead of for us and with us. And I've spent a whole career in public service in the public sector and the private sector. The guy I'm running against has been doing the same job for 3 decades, and he averages 1 law a decade of his own. And that's just not great experience. I think that is why people have given up on thinking their federal government is going to help them, because of people like Congressman Nadler, who may be a nice enough guy, but doesn't accomplish a lot and takes a ton of money from companies themselves. I just don't know how we can take money from corporations as politicians, and then present ourselves as representing people. And all of those things are what's wrong with this system. And I got a lot more experience than the guy I'm running against in changing things. So
We
I
don't need any
kind
nice
of
guys.
refute that answer. What?
I said, we don't need any more nice guys. We want somebody that's going to bring the fire, that's going to go in there and kick some ass and get something done.
Yeah. A couple of times you're like, oh, why aren't you could be more classy about this. I'm like, I'm not trying to be classy. Or like someone said, I was your fan until you did blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't need fans. What I need, I'm not a rock star. I'm not cool. I'm not trying to be cool. I'm trying to change things. And what I need is people who want to join me in that. And, I this is a personal point, and maybe it's because I'm dealing with this idea that somehow my family's fair game for people to talk about, because that's, I guess, how we've conducted politics. But equally, I don't think a lot of the way things have been going is really good for anyone. Like, I don't think that I think a lot of the ways that we present candidates has not been to the benefit of people. And I'm going to change that every day I'm running.
We see the Democratic Party not doing that. We see Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats pushing for COBRA subsidies and also trying to reopen Obamacare re-enrollment for people. But the question is with that is, who's got the money to pay for the COBRA? Who's got the money to pay for Obamacare right now with the expensive payments? I have a friend that's in New York, and he's saying that he was paying like $600 or $700 a month for Obamacare. Who's got that kind of money? So with that said, what would you do in Congress, as far as that, to fight against these people on COBRA and Obamacare?
Yeah. So one thing, I like what you said about COBRA, because I think I'm trying to remember who it was on Twitter who said this. Maybe it was not Jordan Ohl or someone. Basically what the Democrats are talking about right now is insurance for your health insurance, right? Like, that's really what it is. And it's sort of a quippy way to say it, but it's I think it's kind of true, and it's kind of ridiculous. What a response to the scale of this crisis. I think one of the biggest failures of the Affordable Care Act, and I understand the idea behind it, and I do think, unlike some, that it was a positive move, but it's not affordable. So how can you build something as transformative, and it did add, a significant population, millions of people who then got insurance. But for a lot of people, it was called the Affordable Care Act, and it wasn't affordable. So it didn't deliver on the promise that it gave to people. And in some ways, I think that is actually worse, because it feeds into the cynicism that people already have about their government, right? Like, to your point, on the exchange in New York, it is like, we looked at it for one of our, my husband and I, when it first came out, for an employee, it is like $600 a month. And you can choose to opt out of it, obviously, and they have this whole tax scheme so that you would be penalized. Of course, the Republicans took that away. So there is a piece of this that the Democrats have failed, and then Republicans have succeeded at taking away all structure to make something work. So everyone's to blame here. But in my perfect world, and where I do really think we have to go ultimately, is I'm a full believer in Medicare for all. And where we are, even in reviving the Affordable Care Act, isn't going to get us there, because it's not, as we said, affordable. And being able to opt out, and I think this is why so many people who are believers in Medicare for all were so pissed, being able to opt in or out of Medicare for all isn't Medicare for all, because it means that there are all these perverse incentives for the system to be too costly to work, right? And the healthcare companies and their lobbyists and politicians who are bought by that want to make you think that it's just not feasible to make those changes. And the best thing to do on it, who is that? Pete Buttigieg? It just doesn't work. It's called economies of scale. You need to have something where everyone is a part of it in order for it to be feasible. And people don't love their insurance companies. I forget who my insurance company is all the time. I know who my doctors are. I think Pramila Jayapal made that point very well. And frankly, there are a number of ways that we try to get things done, But especially someone like Pramila, I'm really excited to work with when I get to Congress, because I think she has been very successful, very principled, and everyone respects her, regardless of whether they're on her side or not. And I would love to have the opportunity to work very closely with her to advance Medicare for all. And specifically, I'm all in on Medicare for all, and I'm all in on Medicare for all with the opportunity, especially to highlight mental health care, because I think so often that gets put off to the side in the interest of physical health care, but they're equally important. And we're going to need mental health care for all after this crisis.
What is your opinion on New York's job of the crisis, and also in general the Trump administration's handling of it?
Yeah. Well, we'll start with the easy one with the Trump administration. I think he's failed epically. I think he's the worst failure of a president we've ever had. And he's personally responsible for many tens of thousands of people dying that didn't have to. So I'll just leave that there. In terms of New York's response, I think it's been a mix. There's been a tremendous amount of leadership in terms of communicating directly with people, especially in a vacuum where no one at the federal level was talking to people. Governor Cuomo, and full disclosure, as you know, I worked for him, and I have a lot of respect, and I also have a lot of complicated feelings about his administration's shortcoming in a lot of ways, like we talked about. And I think it's the same here. I think he's succeeded in communicating very directly with people, and once there was a plan in place, following that and daily communicating what needed to be known to our city, to our state, and frankly to the country. So that's really powerful. But then you have things like the record number of nursing home deaths, and the fact that in New York we were sending COVID patients back to nursing homes. And then if our nursing home population were its own country, it would be one of the leading countries in terms of deaths from this crisis. That is a real failure in management, I think. And ultimately, there are all these statistics that are coming out that say both he and his administration have done very well in managing shelter in place once it was in place, but that we waited too long. And I do think that the battle of egos between the mayor and the governor contributed to that, having observed it as a New Yorker over many years. And I think that kind of stuff, we just don't have time for that bullshit. I mean, people were dying. And I think that is something that we'll have to continue to reflect on. So I think it's a mixed, accountability, leadership, all these things are really hard. And in this case, the difference of days or weeks in terms of going into shelter in place may have cost us the difference of thousands of people's lives. And some of those decisions also influence that. So it's hard to say on this one issue. You kind of need the 5 minutes to say important positive things, and then a lot of really important things that were missed. Because I feel like we owe it to the people who have been most affected by that.
Well, the virus is just going to keep spreading if there's no leadership and no shutdown. It doesn't matter how low the cases get.
Yeah. So we're not open yet in the city. We haven't even, moved anything to reopen. So we're still very much in shelter in place. And I think it's an abject failure of our federal government that during shelter in place, during stay-at-home orders, they didn't prepare us directly for the public health crisis. So, contact tracing, testing, making all this massively available. That's how places like South Korea have basically moved forward in their economy, because they found a way to track this public health crisis pandemic and at least manage it in a way that they're collecting metrics. They had our entire country shut down, and they did not use that time to help people through that crisis of shutting down. And they did not help governments, state and local, do anything better to manage once we reopen. So we're the most infuriating thing, and there's going to need to be some kind of commission about this. Ultimately, I've talked to a few leaders I know, is that we squandered an extremely painful time to put Americans through, to learn nothing better to prevent pain in the future. I mean, let's be clear. Our federal government did nothing to prevent this from happening again, or from having this scale of life loss again. They didn't implement any infrastructure at a local level. They didn't implement anything that would prevent this again, which is, I think, a human rights abuse. And honestly, Donald Trump and Mike Pence and all of these people really deserve to be held accountable for that. They will be by history. The question is how quickly and under what terms, but they failed. We are no better prepared as a nation to reopen. Because make no mistake, places across the world are reopening, not because we have a vaccination or the coronavirus is gone, but because they've found ways to reduce loss of life. And our government didn't do that. There are clear steps that they could have taken. And then they didn't make it even feasible for us to stay in place unless you're independently wealthy and you don't have to worry. And that's not the vast majority of our country. So they've really failed us at the federal level, at every part of the federal levels, federal government's responsibility, from the White House to Congress.
Lindsey, can you tell people where people can find more about you, how they can help you in these last few days, with the election going on June 23rd?
Sure. So they can find out more about us on our website, Lindsey with an E, Boylan, BOYLAN.com. I'm very active on Twitter, on Instagram. It's just my name. And I would love for you to share a message of change and how important that is right now. I would love small dollar donations that people can support, retweeting, resharing information. Getting the word out is how we're going to win. And I'll tell you this, we have a very good chance at winning because we're fighting hard, and what we're fighting for is so necessary to change. So I appreciate this opportunity. I appreciate everyone listening, and I appreciate you sharing what we're doing and helping us get there. I think we got 28 days at this point, and we can do it.
Lindsey Boylan, thanks so much for coming on. Remember,
Thank you.
Lindsey Boylan, it is New York 10, and definitely help her out. And can you just repeat the website just one more time?
Yes. LindseyBoylan.com. LindseyBoylan.com.